Pele o kalua, mai kahiki, mai bora bora, ma kawa'a honua ia kea, hoe ana o Pele i Hawaii. Kaui ka nau, noe au ka moali'i, ka ho'okele. Eia oni hoa ua me ni'i hau, a ole na'i ka wa'i, he aina no hoe. Mahalo. This was a chant about Pele's journey to these islands and her feeling for following that inner drive for her purpose in life. She had an affinity for fire and she wanted to find a home where she could develop those skills. And she didn't know where that might be, but she held a focus that she wanted to find a home where she could develop those skills. And lo and behold, she came to our island chains and didn't quite find the dry places she needed in Kauai and Niihau, so she kept looking until she found this island. So this chant was to that, following your inner feeling for your purpose, and she found her purpose in life. Her destiny was to become the goddess of volcano and fire here.
Hamakua lo mahalo e hoki mai kai ke hale ame ke pa'imanu mama. That was a formal beginning. This was Alaka'i Susan Pa'iniu Floyd, also a Huna teacher. And my name is Serge Kahili King. And welcome to our Sunday night talk show. All right, so the topic that we have for this evening is how to find your purpose. And that's kind of a tricky wording there. So we'll get started. The way I'd like to get started with this is to tell you a story. This is not, little parts of it might be legend, but mostly this is history. This is just to remind me of some dates that may or may not be important. But here in these islands, one of the most revered people is Kamehameha the Great. And you'll learn in a little bit, if you don't know, why he was called the Great. It's not just because he was the first, which he was too. But he was born here on this island, in Kohala, somewhere around 1758. Now the reason we have to say somewhere is Hawaiians of old did not keep records. They were not too interested in remembering specific dates. It's not part of the way the language is structured. So nobody really knows when he was born. The reason 1758 was born has to do a little bit with legend, because that's when Halley's Comet was visible from Hawaii. And what happens with an awful lot of people who become famous, other people begin to tell stories about why they were famous in the beginning. So a legend has grown up that there was a prophecy that said a great chief would be born during a time of a bright star. That sounds very good, but if you read a lot of Hawaiian legends, it doesn't sound very Hawaiian. So it may have been a prophecy, or it may have been something that came afterwards. But anyway, he turned out to be a great guy, but not because in the teaching that we're doing here, which comes out of Hawaiian tradition, not because of predestination. If we accept the idea of predestination, this implies that we don't have to work too hard for what we're going to get, because it's all set. And Kamehameha worked very hard for what he got. He had a very tough childhood. One of the stories of his time is that there was a rival chief, rival to his parents. Now, he was a noble family, but there was a rival, a man named Alaka'i, and he killed, in a battle, he killed Kamehameha's parents, and he ordered that Kamehameha be killed. And one of the stories around that is that there was another prophecy that said this great chief would overthrow him. Maybe, maybe not. But the point is, Kamehameha did go into hiding, for 5 years. He just disappeared from any knowledge whatsoever. Kamehameha, by the way, this is only one of his names, the name that he has become known by. Now, my Hawaiian is not perfect, but I'm going to give you a little taste of what his real name was. It was Kalani Pai'ea Wohi o Keanui Ke Kalekini Kealikui Kamehameha o Iolani Ikaivi Kapu Kawi Kaliholiho Kanui Akea. And according to some of the historical records, he was mostly called Pai'ea, which in Hawaiian names, sometimes the names are parts of family names, and sometimes the name itself tells a story, either about the person or about some famous event. But this particular name that was used as his most common nickname means a hard-shelled crab. And he had a hard head. We know that from one of the stories, too. And he was a very tough character. At any rate, he was finally accepted into Alaka'i's court, where he was given the most incredible mentor, one of the most highly skilled warriors in all of Hawaii. And his name was Kekuhaupio. But he acted as kind of like his guide and his mentor for most of his life. And so he was brought up and trained in all the skills and trained in all the knowledge. Eventually, he became an aide to the reigning chief of the Hawaiian island, this island of Hawaii, Kalaniʻōpuʻu. And so as in that kind of a category, why we can see some things starting to happen, some growth starting to happen. He was present when Cook arrived in the 1779 trip. So he was on board Cook's ship, that we know from records. But then we don't hear too much else about him for a while until Kalaniʻōpuʻu died. Now, Kalaniʻōpuʻu had a son. I'm not going to give you all these names. You don't have to know them. If you're interested, you can look it up. But he and Kamehameha were rivals. Now, the son got the island. But Kamehameha was put in charge of the war god, which was kind of a religious military position. Kukaili Moku, which was the name of the god of war, the name of the image that was used in which the spirit of the god came. And he was also given the district of Waipiko Valley. Now, it was a small district, but one of the most sacred areas in all of Polynesia. So Kamehameha was in charge of that. And he must have had something in his mind at this point, because Hawaiian protocol, which means the right way to do things, is very, very important, always has been, to a great extent still today. But there was a sacrifice after a battle. They still had human sacrifice at that point, and after a battle, why they would sacrifice one of the captured chiefs. and this chief would be offered. And it was up to the ruling chief of the winning forces to present that sacrifice at the temple. And for reasons that really aren't clear, Kamehameha did it instead. And the thinking is that because this would increase his mana, his power, his potential power. So they sort of became enemies, the son and Kamehameha, after that. And finally they fought, and a lot of Kamehameha's family got together and supported him, and Kamehameha became king of, or high chief, of the whole northern and western part of this island. So that takes us to about 1782. Now, what happened there, a few years later, 1790, make it short, he conquered the whole rest of the island. So he became essentially a king of the entire island of Hawaii. So now he decided to go further. Obviously, he's beginning to get some kind of purpose in his mind, because 5 years later, in 1795, he goes on and he conquers Maui, Molokai, and Oahu. And he marries the highest ranking ali'i of all the islands. Now, ali'i is the term that means the aristocracy or the nobility. Sometimes the word is translated as chief, but it really refers to the whole aristocracy. And they had a kind of system of ranking. People who, because of their birth and their ancestry, had different kinds of what they called then kapu. Kapu was kind of a law, and doesn't only mean forbidden. But so a very, very high chief might have the kind of kapu where anybody who meets that chief has to take all their clothes off and lie down flat on the ground. Another chief of a lesser rank, they don't have to take their clothes off, but they have to lie flat on the ground. Another one of a lesser rank, why if you meet that chief, you have to bare your shoulder. And they had this whole very detailed system of ranking. So the highest ranking ali'i of anybody in Hawaii was a woman, a chiefess, Keopuolani. And so Kamehameha conquered the island that she was from, conquered her father. His father became a vassal, and she became his #1 queen consort. He had 23 wives total. And so she was the #1 because she was the highest ranking. And it just shows how important protocol still was, because his first son that he had by her was even higher ranking. And he was so high ranking that when Kamehameha went to meet him, Kamehameha had to take all his clothes off, lie down, he's the king, okay? He had to lie down on the ground and he let his son jump on him. Because he had to be lower than the sun. But what this is bringing out is he put up with all this stuff because of something he wanted. So it's not just kind of interesting history tidbits. You got to realize there was motivation behind all of this. So he goes on. The two of the children, he had 3 children by Keopuolani, and they're the only ones actually recorded of any interest, because 2 of them became kings. And one of them was a princess who died out of heartbreak. Okay. Anyway, he goes on after all this happens. In 1796, he decides, okay, your lady is going to conquer Kauai. It doesn't work, because there was a rebellion here back at home and he had to stop and come back. But he didn't give up. He still had it in mind. In 1803, he tried again. This time it was disease. He had all these warships and all these armies already on Oahu, and disease struck everybody. Now, there really aren't any coincidences in life, but it so happened that the queen of Kauai at the time, Deborah Kapule, was known to have, or at least had the reputation of having a powerful spell that would protect Kauai. Kauai at that time was called the Island of Powerful Prayers. And her name, Kapule, means the prayer or the spell. Okay, same word. At any rate, he tried twice and was unable to conquer it by force. But then in 1810, when he got the biggest army I've ever seen in Polynesia, with huge ships and cannon and Western, style ships as well as war canoes, and he was getting all those ready, the king of Kauai said, okay, I think I better do something. So he came over and agreed to be the vassal, which means like an under king of Kamehameha. And Kamehameha accepted, and so he became then, in 1810, the king of all the islands. Now that's when some very interesting things started to happen. He'd done all the conquering. He never expressed or seemed to have any interest in going beyond the islands. Of course, that would be a very long way, and the Americans and British might not be too pleased with that. But he, immediately after the war, so it wasn't just because of them, he made them into allies to keep Hawaii independent. He developed a flag to make it a recognized country. He started trade with China, as well as the Americans and British. Those were the most important ones. And he started doing laws like no one had ever made in Hawaii before. One of his laws was called Mamalahoa. There's a legend about it, how it started, but if you read the legend, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the law. The point was, he made this law to make all the king's highways. Now, the king's highways on all the islands were tracks that went all the way around the island, trails, well kept up, that were used to go between the different districts, and were also used by the messengers, who were very, very important as the Pony Express was in the western United States. Well, lots of great stories about famous runners, too. But anyway, he said that, put out the law that all the women and children and elderly shall be safe on the king's highways. They shall not be harmed. No one had ever bothered to do that before. He did that for the whole kingdom. One of the things I read about from when he was on Oahu, after he had conquered the people. Now, typically in Hawaiian tradition, what happened when people were conquered, where all the chiefs were killed and replaced with others, the land was divided up. Any of the commoners who had fought with the chiefs were all killed. The land was taken away and given to other people. Everything of any value was stolen. That was typical. Kamehameha was the first who didn't do that. On Oahu, what he did was no commoners were killed. The chiefs were put into charge under him of their same territories. He didn't divide it up. And he went out in the fields to help the people rebuild their fields, their agriculture. He personally went out and worked in the fields with them. And he became one of the most beloved, because of these kinds of acts, one of the most beloved of any chief in the history. So he did an awful lot of these kinds of things that were unusual, that showed something very interesting. He started off with one purpose, which was to survive. Then he sort of developed another purpose, more ambitious, was to become king of an area. Then he decided, why not keep it up? And then more, and then more, and then until he had the whole thing under his control, and then his purpose was to develop this. So he started off with, let's say, one purpose, but he changed his purpose. He broadened it, he expanded it, he made it different. And he had plans before he died. According to history, one of the last things he said was, continue my work. And all the things that he had in mind to keep developing the country. So there was a man who really deserves all the praise that he's given. He was, in any respect, from anywhere in the world, even though this is a relatively small area, he was as deserving of respect as any other great leader anywhere. Now, this brings us to the discussion of the whole concept of purpose. Finding the purpose, the reason I said that was because that's the way most people think of it. Many, many people think that out there somewhere in the world is someone or something that'll tell me what I'm supposed to be doing here. And people go all over the place looking for a purpose or their purpose. Well, what we're teaching here comes from an esoteric tradition of Hawaii that's called Huna. It's called Huna now. It didn't have a name in the past. But when we're dealing with Western culture, why people like names for things, so we've given it the name Huna. And it's a set of ideas about life. It's not, they're not rules, they're not laws, they're just ideas. And one of them says that the world is what you think it is. And what that translates to for tonight's talk is that your purpose is what you decide it is. This says that it isn't something that you have to do. It's something you decide. Now, you can get inspiration and ideas from others or from spirit or from God, but you've got to make the choice to do something. And we can have big purposes, we can have small purposes. There's nothing in the universe that says it has to be big. Being big may affect a lot more people, but there's nothing in the universe that says a purpose has to be big. But it's also useful to understand when we talk about this, it's good to make a difference between purpose and goal and plan. Because they're not, in this sense, they're not quite the same thing. Purpose is a rough word in English because it can mean something like a goal. It can also mean a motivation, the reason for doing something. And it can, for some people, they think of it as the plan too. But we're really thinking of it as the motivation. The thing that keeps you going in a certain area or doing a certain kind of thing. And that's something you have to choose according to this kind of knowledge. And why is it us? Because there's no one else to tell you. One of the ideas that this knowledge uses is the idea of free will. Free will means the choices come from you. We have the freedom to make choices. It does not mean we have the freedom to do anything we want. We obviously, those of us who have tried, know that we don't have the power to do anything we want. Right? You know why? I'll tell you why. A lot of people wonder why. If we have free will, why can't we do anything? It's because everything has free will. You get all these free wills trying to cooperate, and some of them not cooperating, and the best we can do is influence them. Let me become really skilled at influencing. All right, that means we can get a lot of other free wills to go along with us. Like Kamehameha got all his high-ranking family members to back him in his project. Once we begin acting on something we've chosen, we start to attract people with like-minded free wills to help us. Sometimes we know them, sometimes we don't, sometimes we meet them occasionally, sometimes we'll never know them. There'll be somebody on the other side of the world who has a thought or an action that supports whatever you're doing, and you may never meet them. We have all kinds of stuff in history like this. Somebody invents something. One time, I remember when they were building the big railroad all the way across the United States, and the man's name was Pullman, who was making the cars for transporting people and goods, especially people for the Pullman car. But he needed a particular type of coupling to connect these things together. And it didn't exist in the United States. And so one of the members of his corporation happened to take a trip to Germany, happened to go to a party, happened to speak to a man at that party who had just invented a coupling for something else. That was perfect for that. And without all of those series of connections, which we say was, let's say, subconscious telepathy is a good word, without all of those subconscious telepathies, the railroad system never would have been built. But there was someone with something that could help, and they found each other somehow. Stuff happens like that. Lots of stuff, over and over again. When we focus and keep the focus. Now, we can focus on a plan, we can focus on a goal, we can focus on a purpose. If you're going to focus on a purpose, then all the goals and the plans fit inside that. And it makes things so much easier. So that my purpose is broad enough so that I know if I sit down and watch a television program, I'm carrying out my purpose. If I want to eat a piece of dessert or some chocolate, okay, that fits my purpose also. Okay. My broad purpose that I've chosen, attracted a lot of people who like it, is just to help make the world a better place. And a better place is where more people are enjoying themselves and being creative and having a good time. And so everything I do to have a good time is helping me carry out that purpose. Helping somebody somewhere to have a good time as well. So when we're working on this whole concept, this whole idea, we make the choices. And that's a big part of it, is making the choices. And when do we make the choices? In every given moment. We have to make choices now. We can't make a choice yesterday. We can't make a choice tomorrow until tomorrow becomes this moment. It's at every given moment that we make a choice. And the choices we make are based on our motivations, what is most important to us in each moment. Now that changes a lot, okay? Moment to moment, day by day. When you have an overall purpose, it's kind of like this as an example. Let's take an athlete. Let's take let's take volleyball, because we have that all around the world right now. Somebody who decides to be a professional volleyball player. Volleyball is their purpose. Winning a particular game is a goal within that purpose. Planning the strategy of how to win that game is the plan to reach the goal. So these are sort of how it fits in. So the man doesn't wake up and says, I think I'll be a volleyball player today. No, that kind of covers years at least, if the person is a real professional, could be a woman. And so we can look at our life in terms of a larger purpose. It helps us keep our focus on the smaller things when we need to. So it's a very useful technique. It's not required by anybody, but you'll find it's a lot easier to make choices and to make useful choices if you remember what your purpose is. So it just works an awful lot better. You get confused a lot less. All right, I have to make a choice. Does this serve my purpose or not? Okay, then you can make a decision more easily. You don't have to do it that way, like I said, but it helps. Now, what else helps is loving what you want. This is where aloha comes in as part of this whole kind of a process. The more you love the purpose, or again, the purpose has a purpose. Let's put it this way. The purpose must have benefits. You can love the process, but there must also be some benefit that you love. Maybe you love the feeling you get from helping people. Maybe you love the seeing what they can do with what you've shared. Maybe you love just winning the game. Maybe you love the action, the activity. It doesn't matter. In every purpose, there has to be something you love, or you won't keep working at it. And that what's another thing that becomes very, very useful is whatever you have in mind to do, if you're in a position where the result is not going to be immediate, and it's something you know you're going to have to focus on, give yourself some time to think of what the benefits of this are. Where is the pleasure? You've got mental benefits, and you've got physical body benefits. Now, you've got spiritual benefits too, but you know, it's very interesting. Spirit is very, very important. It's an incredible resource, but it takes care of itself. We need its help more than it needs ours. So we focus on, what are the benefits for your body? Your body is interested in what feels good. What feels good through the senses and through the emotions. And so when you're going to plan something, or when you're going to move towards something, or when you're going to carry out a purpose of some kind that you've chosen, there's got to be what we call the feel-good factor. What's in it for your body? If you want your body to cooperate and not resist whatever it is you're doing. Now, your body's fantastic, because if your purpose is great, and if there are great benefits that are possible, your body will go through pain for those greater benefits, especially the emotional ones. So it's not like it refuses to have any pain whatsoever. If there's a real strong benefit, body will go through pain. That's why bodies climb mountains. That's why bodies do certain kinds of strenuous exercise. That's why body stays with you most of the time when you're studying and doing, intense mental work. When there's a benefit, your body will cooperate. The mental benefits, people don't often talk about this very much, so we don't have ready words in English for this. But what it is, what your mind likes, is resolution. When something kind of comes together and has a completion. Like solving puzzles, solving problems. When a problem is solved, there's actually a pleasure rush that comes through you. So your body's participating, but it's really a mental type pleasure. So we invent games. We create problems. Some people create all kinds of problems to have something to solve. It gives life meaning for them. Because this is a mental pleasure. Your body goes along with it if there's some sensory pleasure in it, but it's the mind that really enjoys that coming to the completion, that resolution. And so if you have something, this is why one of the people have found it difficult to achieve big goals. And they don't use this term very much anymore in popular psychology, but it used to be still a good term. The term was chunk it down. Some of you may remember that. It merely means just when the thing is too big to be able to conceive of, it seems too much, break it down into pieces. Do small parts at a time. You're still going to get the whole thing done, but it's not so overwhelming when you start looking at it. A lot of people give up. It's, that's way too much. Not if you take little pieces of it and make that part of the plan and move forward. Works very well. Again, it's one of these things that works very well. You can do it any way you like. So, this is the loving part. Make sure there's something in whatever your purpose is that you love, you enjoy. And then, again, we talked about it before, but I'm bringing it up again, because it's this concept of mana. Mana is a Hawaiian concept, but it's not, if you understand it, it's not strictly a Hawaiian concept. The usual translation of it is power, but it doesn't mean potential power. Mana is the power that you are able to exert. Strangely enough, it's very, very much like the word power in science, which means the ability to do work. Something has mana when it can produce an effect. And so another word for it, because if you read about mana, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's not just some spiritual thing, although it can be that, but governments have mana. Presidents have borrowed mana. Okay? The mana of a president goes way down the moment he leaves office. Okay? But we all have our individual mana, and not only us, but everything has its own mana, its own ability to affect the environment in some way, shape, or form. And so how much money you have is how much influence you have. And one of the things that's worth studying, developing in whatever area that you're interested in, is how to influence. Because you can't control. You have too many free wills going on. Recently, there was a storm. Started off as a hurricane called Earl. No relation. Except by friendship. Now, what I'm going to tell you, it's perfectly fine with me if you don't accept it or you think it's too far out. That's all right. I'll tell it anyway. One of the things we do as part of what we practice is helping to heal things. We don't heal things directly, we help to heal things. So a lot of people brought it to our attention that this Hurricane Earl was really heading in for the Caribbean, and they were planning and expecting it to hit the east coast of the United States. And so we have worked many, many times with hurricanes here in the islands and other parts of the world, and we have a good friendship with those kinds of things. So a lot of us got together and began talking nicely to Earl in different ways and persuading it to move off east. And not only move off east, but to get weaker. We don't use the word weaker, but we say, calm down as he's going along. And what's very interesting is that Earl did exactly what we had been planning, what we had been working on. Now, we can't take credit for that. The only credit is we helped influence it. Earl had to decide to go along with what we wanted. Because we look at everything as alive, aware, and responsive. Again, this is one of these things that you don't have to look at the world that way. When you do, you have a lot more friends. So there's some nice things about it. Okay? So we look at the world that way, and we talked to Earl and got very friendly with Earl, and Earl got very friendly with us, and so Earl decided, why not? And off he went. Calm down. We have to see he didn't hurt anybody. Sometimes a storm has a free will such that it's got to do something. And we always have some influence, but sometimes we don't have as much as we would like to have. And that's got to be okay, because we're dealing with friends. Because the power to act, and even the power to influence, always comes from inside. Everything has free will. The more you learn how to influence a particular thing in a particular area of life, not only people, the more you understand what motivates them, what helps them move in one direction or another, and mostly it's friendship. then the more things you can influence and the more effectively you can influence. And we won't reach control, but might get really good at influencing. It's like a really good healer. We all know, either through study or thinking about it, that everybody heals himself. Or we can use help. And really good help makes that process of self-healing an awful lot easier. But even the really good medical doctors acknowledge that the healing comes from inside the patient. And we're facilitators. We help that happen. When we help it happen well, we're able to help more people heal. Okay? So learning how to do that helping is very, very important, very useful if that's what you want to do. And the final thing here, now when I say final, I mean I'm going to open it up to questions and discussion, but the final thing here to think about is this. If you're going to be carrying out a purpose, remember, you don't find it, you create it or choose it. Make a lot of plans. There's nothing sacred about plans. Plans are just tools to get something done. And you're going to have to change your plans for any purpose that's going to last any length of time. Let's look back at Kamehameha. He first planned, we'll take the one thing, where he planned to, made all the plans, all the arrangements, everything, to attack Hawaii and conquer it. Okay. Didn't work. He had to go back and make a different plan. So he made a different plan. Did everything, got that one all ready. Didn't work. He had to go back and make another plan. This plan, he was going to put everything in it. And what happened? The king of Kauai said, no, I'll be your vassal. Everything's okay. You're the boss. He had to throw that plan out and rapidly change and make a new plan. That didn't bother him. There's no record of him ever complaining. There's no record of him ever trying to bring an old plan back into play. Plans are just tools. Make as many of them as you need to carry out your purpose if you have a purpose that's important to you. So those are the basic things we want to say about this. Do we have any questions or discussion on the topic? Yes.
If you're not feeling like a purpose is coming to you, if there's a sense of, there's nothing I want to choose as a purpose, nothing is inspiring me as a purpose, what are some of the things that one can do to stimulate a purpose?
All right, that's a good question. If you are using the idea that a purpose is important, okay? Pick anything. Or, like we said before, we use the term, chunk it down. It doesn't have to be a great lifetime purpose. Pick something that's going to last a week or a day. But get used to choosing one. If you wait until something comes up that catches your fancy, you may wait a long time. I had a friend of mine in high school, a really good, close buddy. And I remember talking with him, and we were using metaphors about life. And he said, I'm going to sit under the apple tree and wait for the apple of good fortune to fall into my lap. And I said, well, okay, but I can see that might take a long time, depending on when you decide to start sitting. I'm going to climb the tree and pick my apple. And so I did. And my purpose has modified over the years. But if we want to take advantage of the value of having a purpose, pick one. It doesn't matter what you pick. If you don't have one in mind, then it doesn't matter what you pick. But pick something because it helps you focus. Like I said, it doesn't have to be big. Yes.
What is the distinction or difference, or is there any distinction or difference between what you're talking about, a purpose, and the Hawaiian concept of keokani?
Of what?
Keokani?
There are so many fine distinctions, much more fine sometimes in Hawaiian than they are in English. Okay? Hawaiian has a lot of different things, because even the word pono can be used for purpose. Okay? Kuleana can be used for purpose. But they have fine distinctions that don't come across in English. So the things that we find in Hawaiian that were very important to them are the ones that have more distinctions in meaning. For instance, the ancient Hawaiians, we know, were not all that interested in color. They have very few words for colors. They really didn't make much of a distinction between green and certain shades of green and blue. Whereas we have computers with millions of colors, each one with a separate name. Okay? So in English, there are other things that seem to be more important. Now, you'd think that purpose would be kind of a word that could have fine distinctions, but if we look around the world, there's not an awful lot of people who have a purpose, or even think about it. It's not one of those grabbers that becomes something very important to the culture. So if in looking at the Hawaiian, you want to look at the word, you want to look at the roots, because you may have the same English translation, but the roots will tell you what the fine distinction is. Yes.
I'm wondering about possible distinctions which might exist in this framework between the purposes and pathological purposes.
Okay, that's simple. A pathological purpose is a purpose designed to hurt somebody. Designed to hurt somebody. That's a pathological purpose. A healthy purpose would be one designed to help somebody. And you can that's an easy distinction. Now, in the process of helping somebody, you might, just depending on what your purpose is, you might inadvertently hurt somebody. But that wasn't the purpose, that wasn't the point, that wasn't the motivation. If you're going to be volleyball, you could smack the ball and hit somebody in the face, break their nose. That wouldn't be a pathological purpose to be a great volleyball player. See what I mean? So it's according to the intention, the motivation behind what they're doing. And of course you get feedback from experience. So if you did hit like that, hit somebody in the face, you practice learning how to pick your spot better. And so you improve so that lowers the possibility of that kind of action. Yeah. The purpose, you've got to keep refining strategy and techniques and plans and how you carry out the purpose.
I just had to wonder, how can you tell if it's a positive purpose? Like Kamehameha is killing people and wants to take over all these islands. Is that really
Yeah, well, what we see with Kamehameha at that time, that was a positive purpose. There have been times in the world when killing other people wasn't considered a big deal. Our times have changed, thank goodness. So that it's strongly brought to our attention when somebody does that. We know that's way off base. There have been times in history when it wasn't. And the same was true in the Hawaiian history. Kamehameha was one of the first, not the only one. There's a famous chief of Kauai and Mauna Kalani Po, and there's others that have been in history that they called their times a time of the golden age, when there was peace and plenty for everybody. So they've had it before. But for the most part, the elite were warrior-oriented. Okay? And they underwent hard training to be warriors. That was considered a very high level of accomplishment for a single human being. But you notice in his particular case, he modified and adapted that. Remember, this was before the missionaries came. So they didn't have the influence. But he modified and adapted the way he thinks until by the time he had completely conquered, he had changed his mind. And didn't kill in the same way that the previous kings had. So people can grow. Once they begin to grow, once they begin to connect, once they begin to expand their sense of self, then that kind of stuff goes down. Yes.
Throughout time, one can find out that can try many different purposes in life.
Sure.
Only to realize that they've been wasting their time with things that were not, let's say.
I understand what you're saying. Let me tell you something. No. And again, this is a different way of looking at it. Okay? You can't waste time. Time is not a thing. It's just something, it's an effect. Okay? So time is going to go on regardless of what you do. Now we have the capability of looking back and say, oh, if I'd only done that, but you didn't. Okay? So the only time that really matters is now. Now matters. And now is when you can choose to do one thing or do another thing, to call it waste or to call it relaxation. To call it connecting or to call it wasting time on Facebook. Okay? We are the ones who give it the name, but we will do whatever we do in any given moment. And I find it much more useful not to think in terms of wasting time, but choosing what you want to do with it. And when you look at it that way, you find that there are times when you gotta slow down and take time to smell the pizza. Okay? Otherwise, you get so wound up with, gotta do my purpose, gotta do my purpose, gotta do my purpose, and you get a breakdown. Cause all kinds of resistance trying to do it. We need, life is a wave. Okay? Everything is, but life is too. Okay? And a wave has its time of stress and tension, and it's not a wave unless it also has release and relaxation. And it can be the bigger the wave, the more intense your efforts, the more relaxation you need. You're not losing anything by doing that. You're not losing time. You're actually gaining time because the next wave up is far more efficient. You'll be able to be more relaxed and be more focused for that next upward swing. So I think it's useful not to think in terms of wasting time. Yes?
Can I just make a couple of highlights of my trip to Siberia?
Yeah, please. Susan just came back from teaching this knowledge in Siberia. Go stand up.
What you talked about tonight reminded me of a couple of things that were fitting my purpose. And my purpose in life was to be happy. And in order to do that, I had to learn how to be healthy in my mind and then my body follow. And now I've been able to expand what brings me happiness, and that's teaching other people how to do that, and heal their bodies and heal their minds. And one of the things about the Russian culture is that they have a need in their school systems and their teaching what we're teaching. They want to have people perfect, and they want to cast out people who are not perfect. And I had a special meeting about one of our up-and-coming teachers. Some of the other teachers wanted to kick him out because he wasn't quite perfect yet. And they had a private meeting with me, and there were like 7 or 8 of them, and they were, the only thing I could say was they were really like nailing him to the cross. They were really putting down all his faults, and I'm sitting there thinking, but he's got a lot of good qualities. And the biggest quality he had was he wanted to learn, he wanted to grow, and he wanted to be a good teacher. And one of the things that they brought up was this movie Kung Fu Panda. Do you know that? Have you personally seen it? I had not, but they told me the story, and this is all through translation. And they said that there was a teacher who was so loving the student that they were blind to his ways until it was almost too late, and the student was almost really evil with the powers he achieved. And so he woke up, or he was helped to wake up, and they took this student and put him in jail or something. And I listened to what they were trying to tell me. In other words, wake up, teacher, you've got students who are abusing their knowledge. And I thought, wow, is that really the Hawaiian way? And have I missed teaching my own students how to be loving and how to be supportive and how to be not trying to kill, like Kamehameha learned how not to keep killing. And so I just said to her, I said, because I met this one woman who told me the story, I met her 10-year-old son, and he knows English, and we got to be very close. And I said, what if your son was the student? Would you want him to be thrown in jail, or would you want somebody to try and teach him a better way? They didn't answer me very much at that moment. But before I had left the area we were in, Lake Waikau, she said to me, thank you for your teachings of this pandemic. And that to me was the greatest gift anybody could have given me for my having gone all the way. And it was a beautiful place, but it was really far away from everywhere. That's this knowledge.
Yes.
It's working.
Good. Very good. Thank you. Very much.